So you can do it, but you have to build all that industrial plant first. And you have to do so in an environment when North America is already trying to double their industrial plant because of deglobalization, because we have cheaper energy, because we have a more stable labor market. So all this has to be done at the same time.
Mhm.
Uh, we're going to have some significant inflation for several years. That is unavoidable, even with
Mhm.
good planning.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, the open question at this point is whether the Chinese manufacturing model collapses this year. There's no way it's going to survive the decade.
Mhm.
The China's population is in collapse. The one-child policy is now 40 years old. They've been revising some of their census data. They now think that they overcounted their population by in excess of 100 million people. They were the fastest aging, fastest collapsing demography in human history before that data revision. Now we're just looking at a collapse of their ability to be competitive in anything. So the question is not, will China be the superpower? The question is, how soon will China collapse as a nation state? And that is definitely going to be this decade at this point. We also know that because of the Ukraine war, the Chinese are likely to get less stuff from the Russians than they did before, because
Mhm.
most of the stuff that China imports from Russia comes from Eastern Siberia. The Russians don't have the technology to operate the fields in Eastern Siberia, and all the foreigners have left. So those are all shutting down. So China is the big loser from most of these shifts, whether it's the Ukraine war, or deglobalization, or depopulation, or populism. They're the farthest away from where the raw materials are coming from. They don't have a navy that allows them to go out and get them themselves. They are completely at the United States' mercy for the success or failure of their system. And the Americans just are done doing that sort of heavy lifting.
Mhm.
Two things. Number one, the Americans aren't happy unless they're stressed about something. And it's easy to stress about a boogeyman. We were stressed about the Soviets until they collapsed in a day. Most of us didn't see that coming. So China's just the next iteration of that. Same thing with Japan. Also, we've had the perfect environment for the Chinese for the last 50 years,
Mhm.
especially in the post Cold War system where the United States was holding up the ceiling of globalization and maintaining market openness without a cost. And so a lot of countries, whether it's in Europe or Asia, have really done well in that environment, but it's all dependent on the United States continuing to do that. And we're not anymore. And let me give you a third one real quick that's not demography and not manufacturing. I had where to go. Sorry, slipped my mind. Oh, finance. Thank you. Oh my God. Okay. So with the baby boomers being mature but not retired yet, we have been in the greatest capital bubble in human history, with labor costs. I'm sorry, with capital costs being the lowest they've ever been, and capital systems being the most liquid. In that environment, when cost of finance is no longer really an issue, everyone builds out everything because it makes sense if interest rates are 1 versus interest rates being 10. And in that environment, China was able to develop with a speed and a fervor that no country in history has ever been able to contemplate. But now that labor costs are higher, now that manufacturing costs are higher, now that financial costs are higher, you have to make the case for each individual development in a way, not just in China, but for foreigners going into China, that can't be done in the way that it's been done in the last 30 years. So this is a seizing up of the overall system. And just like in any recession, the folks who have better cash flow and better financial connections and better economics for whatever they're trying to do, those are the ones that make it through. Everything else shakes out. Everything in China is going to shake out.
Mhm.
Well, I'm not a financial advisor, so take
Yes.
this for what it is. I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin. I don't think it serves much of a purpose. I think it is kind of the quintessential example of the odd thing that pops up in an environment when capital is cheap and
Mhm.
available. And as soon as that removes, as it is being removed right now, I just expect Bitcoin to go away. I don't think it's going to be part of the financial architecture at all. Now, digital currencies, that's a different picture, but that's a sovereign question. We can talk about that later if you want. Um, Gold is one of those weird ones. It's a fear play, and there's a lot of reason to expect a lot of fear, but it also has some industrial uses. So that makes it a little wiggly from my point of view, at least for my tastes. Uh, I look for firms that are going to do well because of the change in circumstance. So I'm a big fan of things that are American domiciled, that serve American demand, that use American inputs, or at least North American. The United States has the cheapest electricity and energy inputs in the world. So if it's energy intensive, that actually attracts me rather than repels me. And if at the end of the day, whatever the product is exportable, uh, that's great. So I think food processing and energy processing, for example, because the US produces more than enough for its own needs, but then those are two products that are going to be in shorter supply in the wider world. Not too much. I mean, I'm getting a little out of my space here, but the idea of cryptocurrencies, the idea behind it that there's a digital asset, that's a solid that's a solid technical evolution that is real. And the idea that we'll have a digital dollar, I think, is inevitable. They're obviously working out the kinks, and the Federal Reserve is not known for making rash decisions, but we will get there. It's just a half a step removed from what we're doing with banking already. The biggest difference, of course, is that you would just have a Federal Reserve account is probably the form that it will take. And that is going to be a problem for traditional banking. But to think that agriculture and manufacturing and all their aspects of finance are going to change, but that one is not, that seems a bit of a reach to me. Well, I will always tell everyone in the United States to learn Spanish. It's already our second language, and it's going to be the second language of the Western Hemisphere as a whole. So that's a solid one. As the baby boomers move on and the new generations take their place, we need to get back into blue collar and manufacturing in a very big way. We can't rely on the rest of the world to help with that. We can't rely on the Mexicans to help with that because they have a baby bust going on as well. So anyone who can do kind of the nuts and bolts stuff of the economy, electricians, plumbers, I realize that sounds a little lowbrow, but we've been discriminating against those sectors for 40 years now, and it shows. And the baby boomers were the last class that really had that full set, and they're retiring. So, we're going to have first-year plumbers making $85,000 a year within 3 or 4 years here. And if you want to work to get money, that might be a solid choice for you. Beyond that, the nature of skills in general. One of the great things about the Industrial Revolution is it generated a demand for both very high-skilled labor and very low-skilled labor. If you were on the high end, you would design the refining systems. You would design the parts. If you were on the low end, you would work the assembly line. But that all requires mass production consumption. That world's going away. We're going to have a lot smaller runs of things that are going to have to be adjusted on the fly. And the technologies that look most promising, things like 3D printing, computer design, machine shops, that is where the future of that will be. It'll be a more irregular thing because you're not just churning out the same part for hundreds of millions of product. What you're making is going to change every week, but the value out of that is huge. So that's where the big jobs of the future are going to be, that kind of micro manufacturing, custom manufacturing work. And again, I hate saying this, New Jersey's perfect for that. I think it's going to help quite a bit.
Oh, okay.
One of the downsides of 3D, part of the downside of 3D printing has been its speed. You can only make parts a few at a time, or one at a time per machine, actually. And that means the cost is high. But if we're moving into a world where the mass manufacturing model is collapsing for various reasons anyway, all of a sudden that becomes less of a concern. In addition, one of the really big advantages of 3D printing is a complex part that if you do it from the old die cast or injection molding style, might be like 15 pieces. You can do that all with one run of a 3D printer. And so instead of 30,000 parts for a car, a 3D printed or contributing with 3D printing to a car is going to shrink the number of parts by at least 2/3, which should be a huge help for anyone in that space.